Okay, I believe that we are live. We're going to just wait for a second, and I want to confirm and see what YouTube thinks, if YouTube thinks that we're live. Yep, we are live. So I'm going to
Nice.
hide the question so I can talk to you. Okay, everyone. My name is Daniel Roy Greenfeld. You might know me as PyDanny or Daniel Feldroy. I am, my claim to fame is I've done a bunch of Django, so you can see one of the covers of the version over there, 2 Skips of Django. And I am very excited to have an hour of Sebastián Ramírez's time. And Sebastián Ramírez, for those of you who don't know, is the founder, the creator of the FastAPI project, the Typer project, and SQL Model, plus a whole bunch of other things that he's working on. So, hey.
Nice. Hey, Daniel. Thank you very much for having me. And thank you, everyone, for joining and watch us talk, I guess.
Yeah. So what I did before this is I came up with, I've asked for people to submit a bunch of questions. So I think what we'll do is go through those in a sort of a conversational way. And then we'll open the floor to questions from the comments if we have time left.
Nice.
And I have you for an hour, and we'll see how things go. So I think where would be a good start looking at the questions? I think I'll start with my first question, or one that comes from me, which is, so about 9 years ago, my better half, my wife, Audrey Roy Greenfeld, she created a project called Cookie Cutter, which is a project template system. And from what you were just saying just a few minutes ago, is it was part of the creation process for FastAPI. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, totally, of course. So in case someone that is joining doesn't know what Cookie Cutter is a project that allows you to create a code structure, like a directory with a bunch of files, and then it can have a special file that is used by a command line application, which is Cookie Cutter, and that uses this file structure to generate a new file structure. So it's a system to generate projects, to generate new projects. To generate new projects from a template. Am I explaining it right?
Yes.
Sort of.
Yes.
Probably a sloppy way to explain it, but yeah.
No, it definitely you're on it.
Nice. So this Cookie Cutter project, there's a lot of templates like out there in the wild that are made to be used with Cookie Cutter to generate new projects for you to use. And one of the first stages of the process of figuring out how to build FastAPI was actually a Cookie Cutter project that I built. I created this project using Flask and a bunch of plugins that did most of the things that I wanted to have. And it was this big Cookie Cutter project. And it was like the fact that it was Cookie Cutter, that it was a template project, was important because it already had like all the plugins connected in the way they will not explode, because like having a lot of plugins that are not made to be integrated together necessarily, and then like making them work together can be like a fragile process. So they had to be put like exactly in the right way for everything to work correctly. And once I had that thing finally pinpointed, then I created this template, this project generator. It was, I think the name was Full Stack, and it was made with Cookie Cutter. And like that combination of plugins and that combination of Flask with these plugins, with all these ideas, was one of the first steps into FastAPI, because FastAPI came to be from the learnings of a bunch of all the other frameworks that I had used and all the other tools that I had been using. Even front-end frameworks and even other languages. I wanted to have all these features in a single place. So FastAPI was born out of like all the learnings from all this previous work that was already done. And Cookie Cutter was like this template with Cookie Cutter was the best thing I had up to that point before creating FastAPI. So it was a very nice, like right there at the beginning.
Nice. And one of the things that's really fascinating is that you've always credited the predecessors to FastAPI, that you don't, FastAPI clearly did not come out of a vacuum. Nothing ever does, but the fact that your attribution is so prominent is, I think, it's very, I guess, I don't want to use the term honorable, but to me, being having done a lot of open source, that attribution is important. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I know that ties into the documentation of Typer and FastAPI and other projects.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's also related to like how FastAPI was born. Like I was avoiding creating a framework. I was avoiding creating a new project for a long while. I was trying to use everything that was already there available and like trying to find what was the thing that will hit right in the spot where I wanted, the thing that I wanted. And I learned a lot from all these tools and all these frameworks and like like all these learnings were that allowed me to end up building FastAPI. And then when I was building FastAPI, there were already great tools to compose all the parts. So Pydantic is the thing that does all the data validation, data serialization, and documentation. And then Starlet is the thing that does all the web parts. And FastAPI just like smushes them together, combines them with OpenAPI and the other standards, and as dependency injection and a couple of other things. But like like all the heavy lifting is done by these previous projects. And in turn, all these previous projects depend on other amazing projects. So like, yeah, like I feel it's always, we're always based on and like sitting on the shoulders of giants at whatever is the level that we are. Like we are always using the work from others, and like yeah, like I feel like all these projects that are feeding these capacities and these features deserve to have like all the credit for all the work that they are doing. Yeah, I don't know, like it's something that is very important to me. Also because, for example, FastAPI, when I made it, it was kind of I considered it the spiritual successor to API Star. API Star was a framework that existed before, and it had a lot of great ideas. And when I was about to switch to API Star, Tom Christie, the author, had to deprecate it and say like, "Hey, I cannot keep doing this. I have to."
I remember I was disappointed too. I was excited by it. Yeah, I was actually blogging or writing blog entries on it, and then he said that, and I was like, "What? Oh no!" So I think there's one or two still left in my list of articles. So one of the things that I think is interesting is there's a corollary here between FastAPI and Flask. And Flask is a combination of pieces. I can't remember the name of the WSGI library that Armin used for it. And
Werkzeug.
What?
Werkzeug. Werkzeug.
It's
like it's a very German word. Like like I always struggled so much with
it. But he basically took pieces, most of which he started with, and he combined them together to build Flask. And I've always felt that FastAPI builds off of that pattern. I think it's great. Rather than trying to build a full stack framework from the beginning, you used working pieces and assembled them together. So, and I know others have followed similar patterns.
Yeah, absolutely. And like a lot of the design of FastAPI was inspired by Flask. Like the way that you put decorators on top of functions, the way that you use some type of request object. It's just that in FastAPI is not like a kind of global object, but like the way that you interact with the code was heavily inspired by FastAPI. And I agree that like this idea of combining the best tools that can do the job is like the best way to go. In fact, in FastAPI, there are multiple places where, like, I don't know, I could have added a wrapper on top of another library or something like that. And I explicitly wanted to not do that. And I actually added a lot of documentation about how to use the other tool without requiring a plugin for FastAPI. Because, I don't know, I think it's a very, very useful skill and a very useful tool to be able to use the libraries by themselves and being able to mix them together. I think that's very powerful. And when it's all kind of hidden in an abstraction layer that doesn't necessarily simplify things much, I think that's it's a difficult trade-off. So yeah, I think it's great to be able to pick these amazing libraries and build things with all of them together.
And you talk about documentation and documenting these things. That brings me to a point, which is the documentation of your libraries, especially your 3 most popular ones, is really good. It's very approachable, and well, yeah, I guess you could have auto-generated internal API docs. That's useful. It's not super critical, but as someone who's done a lot of documentation, written books on frameworks, specifically Django.
Skips of Django.
I am impressed by what you've done, and I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to that, because I know that is one of the ingredients to your success, is your ability to document what's important for actual users of the frameworks.
Thank you very much. Yeah, indeed, I feel that documentation and explaining things and making things easy for users is a huge part of the success of FastAPI and of many libraries and tools and projects. I think that that's a key component, and it's sad that in many cases people consider it a less important part, or less like, okay, no, let's have someone else write the documentation. We will write the important things, like a point of view like that. And for me, documentation is as important, or sometimes even more important than the code itself, because it's the way that you explain how do I use this thing. And what I wanted with the documentation was to have it explained the way I wanted to. I wished I had things explained to me when I was learning all these ideas. And it's something that is not necessarily easy to achieve, to explain things the way you would have wanted them explained.
No, it's not. I can tell the audience that is very true.
Because once you are working with the internal code, and once you kind of memorize how things work, it's very easy to assume concepts and ideas and components and just mention them, right, and just throw them in the documentation without ever explaining them before, or mention them before explaining them. So if there's a concept of, I don't know, some component here, but it's explained 3 chapters afterwards, then you're just skipping some information. So I was very, very careful of doing all that in a way that the way that I wished I had seen that. And actually, I had a whole process of, when I wrote the documentation, I read the thing after writing it. I read the whole thing several times. I kept fixing things, and I iterated until I thought that there was not much more to improve. And I also realized, I'm using this concept. I have to explain it before. So in many cases, it meant adding a previous chapter that I didn't think about even before, just to explain that concept before using it afterwards. So that was it. It's a fun thing that is kind of solving a dependency graph. If you academic,
I know. I've been there. Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I think it's a very important thing to take care of.
So is there another project where you've looked at the documentation and said, oh, this is where I like to, this is what I'd like to attribute? And was there any particular project that you admire in terms of documentation?
I'm pretty sure there was. I'm trying to think a specific one. For example, the documentation for VueJS, the front-end framework.
Yeah,
is amazing. I think a big part of its success is the documentation. It was so good and explained things so well, and it was so clear, and so it was designed for people to learn how to use VueJS, not necessarily to argument, to prove or show arguments of why the writers of the library built it that way. which, in many cases, documentation is written from the point of view of the technical person that built the thing, and they start explaining, oh, this class does this, and this creates this other class. But the final user, the final developer that is using the library never creates or uses those classes, only calls one function and the thing happens. Like having that focus and that point of view of the final user, that makes a whole difference. I think VueJS did a great work on that.
I absolutely agree. I actually looked at React years ago and was frustrated by the quality of documentation and the assumption of the library that you knew the library. And this was in a lot of tutorials of the time. And Vue.js was a breath of fresh air. And speaking of which, I started to really learn it with Audrey in your hometown of Medellin in Colombia. So,
really? That's
yeah.
So fun.
But and I think that's why, in large part, Next.js, which is powered by React, has become so popular, is because it too embraces that same idea that Vue.js does, where let's explain what's important, truly important, not just a make work tutorial that's just copy paste. It actually teaches the concepts that you need to have, and Vue.js is good at that, and FastAPI is good at it. So good on you for that. I know it certainly makes using Vue.js very easy, although now I'm wanting to dig into code. Let's see. So I asked the documentation question. I think since we're on documentation, I'm going to go to the one that's going to be uncomfortable for me. And you asked this, which is 2 scoops of FastAPI. Do you want to talk or should I talk?
Go ahead. I want to see what you will say.
All right. So for those of you who don't know, 2 Skips of Django, the latest version 3.x, isn't quite finished. And one of the things that hasn't happened because as we haven't had a print version of it. And the reason for that is time. That writing books takes an enormous amount of time. Until you do it, you have no idea of the scale of work that you have. And so am I tempted to write 2 scoops of FastAPI, especially now since I'm working in it quite a bit more on a professional project and also on a personal effort? Absolutely. But for me, there's 2 challenges. One is time, because my job at Octopus Energy keeps me really busy. So that's the first issue. And then the second thing is just experience. Like I was able to write 2 skips of Django because I sat in the room with Django core developers 12, from 2009 to actually 2008-ish to 2011. I was working a lot with them. So I picked up a lot of tribal knowledge. And 2 skips of Django was a translation of that tribal knowledge into written form. That there's a lot of stuff that is documented in the Django project core docs, as well as people copy and paste articles from 2 skips of Django and they make blog articles about it. That's super common. And at that point, the core developers really at first didn't see a need for the book. I had pushed back from it on a bunch of them. I don't know I know that books might be useful, but even if I had the time, I would need to sit in the room with luminaries in the FastAPI world, or have the time to dig in really. So that would mean you and I would be working together, and I don't know how feasible any of that is. So, but I am really tempted. If I could make it happen somehow with my schedule, I would. So,
That's very
so do you want to comment on that, Sebastian?
No, that's amazing. But writing books must be so time consuming, and all that process, and you also have to deal with editors and formatting and how to explain this and how to include code examples. I don't know, I find it difficult. I think I haven't written a book. I have only written articles and stuff, but I have written a lot of documentation. But also for me, writing documentation and writing using the documentation tools and the documentation site and having a web browser to show information, for me it's a lot easier. So yeah, like it's easier for me to explain things that way. I know that there's many people that prefer books and like being able to like have something that you can carry and just continue reading anywhere. But like, yeah, I imagine that it has to be such a big effort. Like, yeah, several publishers have approached me to write a book about FastAPI, but like, yeah, no, like my time I'm still trying to squeeze more time to put more to FastAPI. I wouldn't be able to write.
Right. Well, the thing is, if you write a book, when are you going to have time to work on FastAPI? That's the question you have to remember. That because I can tell you what we do, how we make time. We go on sabbatical. We basically stop working for several months and focus like full time on updating. And we've done that on every edition from the first one to this current one. And part of it is maybe it's because we have really high standards, but you do too. So if I were you, I would resist. And if you do ever decide to do it, like talk to me about self-publishing before you get a publisher.
Of course,
I'm not
of
sure
course.
what a publisher would get you.
Yeah, and also because like I understand that in many cases with the publishers and everything, like it's a big part of the reward of it is having the I don't know, renownedness or like the name and stuff, and like, oh, this is an authority in this field and stuff. But like, yeah, I don't know, like I don't know how important it is to have the name of authority plus API. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, I just, if you were working on it, I don't see when you'd have time to actually support the project.
Yeah. Also that like when I have something that I want to explain and I want to explain something more, I end up putting it in documentation. For example, with SQL Model, I wrote the thing. I wrote it's actually very small, very little code. But then I started to explain how to use it, and like I don't know, it kind of hurts to not explain the concepts that need to be explained to me. So I ended up just writing so much documentation, just explaining the basics of databases, of SQL, of indexes.
I've noticed that you, I mean, actually between you and me and everyone else who's listening, I think you get a little bit too deep into the nitty gritty of the basics of databases with SQL Model. That I don't know if I can't remember if you've broken out into basic and advanced sections, but if you haven't, you should.
Yeah, but like like for example, I don't know, like for example, indexes is something that I feel is like people get it wrong so often.
Oh yeah.
Just for not knowing how it works and like where do you have to put the index. It's not necessarily obvious or intuitive, but adding an index is so simple. It's so simple and so easy. But like in terms of code, in terms of the changes that you have to do, but you need to have all these massive conceptual model of how indexes work and like where do you need them, and like I don't know, like I guess
I mean, part of it is I've been using indexes for many years, so and and in fact someone in the chat said I disagree on that one. It's great to explain all the core concepts that are relevant to solution place. So I stand corrected.
No, but like it's always this trade-off, like how approachable to make it, and at the same time how much to explain things. For example, I in the FastAPI documentation I have this section about explaining async and await, and like what is the idea about async and await, not even how it works internally, but like what is the idea behind it, why would you want to have async and await. And all the explanation is through a story with concurrent burgers. And then I use a bunch of emojis. And the idea with the emojis is to have them as visual cues of what is the particular entity that I'm referring to that I already mentioned before. Because when you start thinking about like, this is the character and this is the other and this is the other one, but like which one refers to which thing, it can get confusing. So I have a bunch of emojis just as visual cues, but then there's too many emojis. And
Yeah.
that's
And you
something
love
that
your
is,
emoji.
but it's so fun that there's a bunch of people that really like that section and that mention it and that comment about it and take screenshots and stuff. And on the other side, there's a bunch of people that really hate that section. It's like too many emojis. Get serious. Start putting emojis. So yeah, it's this strange trade of how to explain things that are approachable and nice to everyone.
Yeah, I again, having written books and lots of documentation on lots of projects internally and publicly, or privately and publicly, I totally get it. You're writing to multiple audiences, and so it's a challenge.
Yeah, and like the first critic is yourself, and like
Mm,
that's also difficult. That's a difficult one.
yeah. So, all right. So I guess let's see. I want to talk a little bit about Django and the relationship with FastAPI, because one of the things early on with FastAPI, I was like, wow, I bet you could run Django models in FastAPI. It's not that challenging if you've done like written third-party apps for Django and you've written out like the configuration settings so that way you can run tests. So it's kind of the same concept, and you just stick that into a fast API project. And then a guy in Greece, a really smart guy, wrote an article about it. But one of the things I've always wondered, and I haven't even checked your issue list for it, is has there ever been a thought about having a Django model plugin? So that way, especially for existing Django projects to leverage in Fast API, because some people prefer to use that over competing frameworks like Django REST framework, and I guess there's Django Ninja now, which I'll ask about in a few minutes. So I was wondering if there's been any thought about a plugin or some integration piece in Fast API for that.
The thing is that I am not an expert in Django, so I wouldn't really know what are the necessary steps to make all that work, and that's the main thing, because like I feel it will probably benefit a lot of people. I think it's not something that will require a plugin or like something complex in particular in FastAPI internally, but it's something that requires the internal knowledge of how Django works and how all these things are wired, because at some point something has to provide a connection and a session to the database, and that has to be in some way tied to a particular request. So that will probably have storage in thread local variables, and if it has a storage in thread local variables, then it's not going to be compatible with async and await unless they already migrated to context vars. I don't know if they have, like, they probably, I guess they will have that in plans to be able to support async Django. I don't really know.
They do. Yeah, I wonder, because I guess if you're doing concurrent fast or well, not concurrent, but non-asynchronous fast API, which is very much a thing, and still great, then yes, doing the Django pieces, and that's in fact how I've done it in the past. But as soon as we get into the asynchronous world, yeah, it does make it a bit more complex.
But the thing is that when you're not using async fast API, you're using like synchronous code, blocking code, normal def functions, and you use something. So for actually for those that might not know, and I will expect it will be a lot because I don't even consider myself an expert in the area. Thread local variables are variables that have a value that is only available in a particular thread. And when you try to access that value in another thread, it doesn't exist, or it will have a specific value to itself. So, for example, when you are using, if you are using Flask and you are using the request object, or you are using the G object from Flask, that's actually storing stuff in thread local variables. That way, the same code can be handling multiple requests, but if each request is in a specific thread, then each request will have its own version of the value of that variable. So those are thread locals. But the thing with thread locals is that when you start using async and await, then async and await can run a lot of concurrent code. Concurrent means during the same period of time. So it's not necessarily in parallel. It can be like one little bit first, then another little bit of another task, then another bit of the initial task. So it's during the same period of time, but all this work during the same period of time is being done in the same thread. And if you have something that is a thread local, a variable that is only available in one thread, it will be the same value for all these different pieces of code. And you actually need each of these blocks of code to have its own piece of information, its own version of the variable. So then they added to Python this new module that solves that problem that is called context variables. And it's the equivalent of thread local variables, but it's not only compatible with threads, it's also compatible with async and await. The thing is, thread locals, many libraries were built when there were no context vars, and they depend on these thread local variables. And then if something depends on thread local variables, it might not work with something that can run things on the same thread.
Right, and that's why I was saying, oh, that's going to be, it may be challenging to get asynchronous Django to work with asynchronous FastAPI.
And the thing with FastAPI is that when you don't use async functions, when you use normal functions that you can do, and then you can use like blocking code and everything, it actually runs those functions on a thread worker. And this is actually done all by started, which is the thing that does all the web parts underneath. But then FastAPI also has dependencies. And these dependencies can be async or can be non-async. And these dependencies can have dependencies that can also be async or non-async. And like you can mix and match all these things however you want, and FastAPI will do the smart thing and run the async stuff in the main event loop and run the non-async stuff in a thread worker. But that means that the same section of code that handles a single request, for example, it can handle authentication in a dependency, but then it can handle the rest of the request in the main code, in the main function that handles some particular path operation or endpoint or however you call it. That like the code that handles a single request can end up running in more than one thread because it's running, it could be running different parts in different thread workers if you are using dependencies. So that means that if you have a value that is in a thread local and not in a context variable, then that value that will be available in some parts of the code, but not available in other parts of the code. And if you need a session or a connection to the database and you need to share that same connection to the database across the whole application, then that's going to be problematic because you don't have access to that same value in the multiple threads that could be interacting with an application. So if you don't use dependencies, you can probably just use use the same Django ORM without too much complications. But if you need to use dependencies and like the other parts, that might get tricky. And it's probably doable. You can probably patch the parts of Django that use thread locals for the ORM so that they use context variables so that they can be used like all around the place. But I haven't checked how to do that. I actually have a bunch of documentation of how to patch Peewee, which is another ORM, to make it compatible with these things. But
yeah, I saw that. And for those of you who are on Django, one of the and are wondering, hey, can I use FastAPI to publish an API? One of the neat things is your SQL model library has kind of a Django-y feel, but it's running SQL Alchemy under the hood. So that kind of solves the problem. And in fact, that's something that I've done is what I'm doing these days is I am basically mapping out Django models to SQL model and just moving off that way so I don't have to worry about it because no one's paying me to figure out how to make the bridge that you were just talking about. To like map that out. That's a substantial amount of work.
Yeah, and the thing is, like the design and the way it works is a bit it's a bit different. How it works in SQL and how it works in Django. If you are like already quite used to how Django works and how each model has .objects, like I don't know, like all the methods in each particular class, then you can try out Tortoise ORM, which is an ORM inspired by Django. That is compatible, is made for async and await, and it's actually like all the same design and all the same principles. So yeah, that could be a way to move.
Yeah. Well, I do know that there's something called Django Ninja, which follows patterns, I guess, established by FastAPI and Pedantic or Pydantic, as an alternative framework for or Django's framework. So if you want to have that type kind of love, that is something that you can do in Django right now. So for those of you who are asking, because Howard Gudowitz asked that question, he asked if actually Django Ninja is a fat gateway drug, and I guess in a way it is, but
Yeah,
okay.
totally. And you know what's fun? That FastAPI, it's fun, like it's part of the story of FastAPI. So there was Django, and then there was Django REST Framework. And Django REST Framework was the first thing that I saw that generated documentation automatically for the API. And it was like, wow, this is so amazing. I want to have this.
It was amazing when it first came out.
And then there was OpenAPI, which was a standard. And then there was Swagger UI, which was this similar thing that had like interactive communication with the API. And it's like, oh my God, this is even cooler. This is a standard. And like, let's do something with this. And, the creator of Django REST Framework is Tom Christie. And then he created API Star, which is the thing that was like FastAPI was the spiritual successor of. So like all of these ideas actually came from the same person that built Django REST
Tom
Framework.
Christie is brilliant.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And the thing is before Django's framework, there was oh my goodness, can't believe I can't remember the name of the library. It's by Daniel Lindsley, who created the API that Flask eventually copied.
But Bottle, was it? You said?
Oh no,
Itty
is
okay.
was the original idea. And Daniel says that it was a copy of Sinatra from the Ruby world, and then he kind of ported it over, and then Bottle copied Itty, and then Flask was inspired, and eventually we get to FastAPI. We all stand on the shoulder of giants. So one of the reasons
for example, Tom Christie is the author of Django REST Framework, API Star, which inspired FastAPI, Starlet, which is what FastAPI is built on top of, Ubicorn, which is the server, HTTPX, the HTTP client, MakeDocs, the thing to build the documentation. It's like so many things. It's amazing. It's incredible.
Yeah. So one of the thing is I have worked a lot with Django REST Framework, and in fact, it's really powerful at my, especially if you're dealing with a larger project. Having the kind of all those classes and abstraction of common functionality is really nice. The downside is it can make debugging slow, and that's something I do appreciate with FastAPI, because I think most of the projects, at least I'm working on, where I'm using FastAPI, I don't need 1,000 endpoints. I need 20. And so for that, FastAPI is just amazing. And I don't know if there are any like really large implementations of FastAPI, not in terms of scale, but the number of endpoints and management of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I don't know. Like at work, I work mainly at Forethought, which is this company doing artificial intelligence for the customer experience area. Like we have a lot of API endpoints, and like it's all FastAPI. But the thing is, it's also the idea with FastAPI is to have as little code as possible and have like best practices and like good defaults as easy as possible, so that like you can just like write 2 lines of code and you have the new endpoint, and then like the idea is to make things as simple and easy.
Yeah, I know your FastAPI docs. You take in some parts you're suggesting that people take the code from the views, like the data manipulation code, and move it into like crud.py. And I haven't seen it explicitly stated, but yeah, if I were going to write a best practices treatise on FastAPI, I'd be like, your views, your FastAPI views should be as thin as possible, like tiny as possible, and then move that logic to other functions that are more easily tested. And that's
probably. But like that's one of my, I guess, kind of controversial point of views, and is that I don't think that it's necessarily always great to have a very fixed structure of files, because it's easy to end up having like a lot of abstractions that can become more difficult to deal with. And if you are just doing CRUD operations and you are only doing them in the API, then it might be not as bad to have them like on the same code. And if you are being able to test it that way and you're not needing to overwrite things in tests or things like that, it might work fine. What I think is very important is to have good type annotations and good tests so that you can refactor easily whenever that's needed.
I agree with you. One of my challenges that I've seen again and again is the volume of abstractions in Django REST framework, which we also see in other libraries. Or Graphene being the classic example. And I don't want to like say anything bad about anyone or anyone's project, but the abstractions in Graphene drive me nuts. So I do like that you try to keep things as low level as possible. And one of the things is also, if you're wondering when is FastAPI going to abstract this common functionality, my suggestion to you is create it yourself. And if you come with a pattern that you think is something that can be replicated, write an article about it or create an open source library. I know that there has to be like awesome FastAPI list, so you can get it there. I mean, that's part of the fun of it, is because Sebastian isn't creating these abstractions that people may need. People can create the ones that they want rather than getting something handed from on high, which may not fit every use case. Does that kind of summarize
absolutely.
it?
Yeah, perfectly. Perfectly.
So I have a question I want to ask real quick. I want to hear your take on it because I have mine, which is, will there be official support for session authentication in FastAPI? And I have my take on it, but go ahead.
I want to hear your take.
So a REST API is, I can't remember the abbreviation. It's like representational state transfer or whatever, but it's supposed to be stateless. And the addition of JWT or other things, or HTTP basic auth or OAuth, what have you, arguably, it should not be worrying about. It should worry about authentication, but not stateful authentication. That's adding something to it that kind of breaks the model of a RESTful harness. And now that said, what Sebastian could do is perhaps link to articles or libraries that provide support for this. And if there's one that's well maintained and run by a good group, I think it would be great if you did that, because otherwise people will invent their own and they'll do it badly. And I've seen this in other communities. You certainly see this in various RESTful, like in frameworks where they provide support for REST or GraphQL, and we see this very frequently with people using JWT as authentication. So that's my take on it. You should not do it, but you should point out that people are doing it well.
Yeah, I also think that it probably will make sense to have it in the documentation and to explain how to do it and how to build it and how to do it properly. Also because session handling and session management is actually a bunch of concepts of how the web works underneath. In the end, it's cookies and how cookies can be encrypted and how you can put information encrypted in cookies, or how you can put like some opaque token in cookies and then save information about that opaque token in Redis or a database or something like that. But it's actually it sounds as if it was a very defined term and very technical or academical term, but it's actually like a wrapper or a topic of how to use the internal technologies. And I will prefer to say, hey, you can use cookies this way. You can use a cookie in a dependency in FastAPI and make sure that the cookie has this value and this storage, and then you can encrypt the things that you need to save with this library, and then you can store that in the cookie that you're returning back, and then like explaining how session actually works instead of providing a utility to set or get information from the session without explaining how things are happening. It's like, for example, with the course cross-origin resource sharing. I think A lot of people suffer with that, especially when working with front ends and backends, and even more if they are dealing with multiple domains. And most of the people don't really know how it works. And there are so many applications that just try to allow everything because the thing is not working, and not understanding what is happening, who is complaining about what and why. Like, like, why is the browser complaining? Would other thing complain? Who has to change it? Who has to fix it? The front end or the back end? Like there's a lot of.
It's complicated. There's multiple points of view, because also if you provide session authentication, what if it doesn't quite match up with this X super popular framework? Are then you having to code to address that, and then is that taking you away from other projects? So
Yeah, totally. That's why I will, instead of having like some internal utility for session and authentication, I will rather explain how to use cookies and how to mix cookies with cryptography libraries to encode the things that you want, and then just store them and then just extract them, but not creating a new utility function in FastAPI, just explaining how to use the internal parts in FastAPI to build whatever you need to build. That way, it's also that my idea is that it will also help improve the intuition about how FastAPI works, because it's not that I'm teaching a new component of FastAPI, it's the same components, but it's, hey, you can use it in this particular way to solve that particular problem. That's kind of my intention with the whole thing.
Excellent. And so one thing that I get asked a bunch, and I'll just give everyone the quick answer, which is there going to be like a Django admin UI in FastAPI? And I hope you don't plan on building that, because I know how much time has been spent on the Django admin, and it's more than anyone probably realizes. And so there are several. If you just do a search on like FastAPI admin or SQL Alchemy admin, that solves the problem. We want Sebastián working on other things than providing that interface. That will become a full-time job for him.
Yeah, totally. And the thing is that like an admin interface is normally tightly coupled with a particular database or data storage or data model. And that makes sense when the library is tightly coupled with SQL, but FastAPI is not tightly coupled with any type of database. You can use it with SQL or with any NoSQL database or without a database, however you want. So it will make sense to have a predefined admin interface. I would like to build something, or that if it exists, some automatic front end based on OpenAPI, that it could read the OpenAPI specification and generate like a simple UI. It would not be as advanced as an admin like Django's admin, but it could help like building quick applications and just like having a very simple input that doesn't have to be like the actual Swagger UI. But yeah, not like something that will be an admin integrated into FastAPI itself that will make it depend on some particular database or things like that.
Yeah, I bet there's already tools that do this, and if there isn't, or if there's some kind of specific FastAPI thing about it, like, hey, that's a great open source project or startup idea that people can put together.
Totally.
Yeah.
And like there are several, as you were saying, there are several admin interfaces, even for several different types of SQL databases, and for different types of ORMs. So yeah, there are multiple options to solve it depending on your particular application.
Okay, so we have 12 minutes left, and I'm going to touch on the tricky subject, which is governance and the hot topic. So what we mean by governance is, right now, as far as I know, the majority of your projects, you are the sole person who can merge stuff in. And the question has been raised of certainly like, hey, he's doing it all himself. There's no way one person can maintain a project like this. He should open it up. So let's let's talk it through, because it's a tricky topic.
We can also, now that we are doing this, we can also talk about politics and like other very difficult stuff.
Yeah.
No, yeah, but like, so the thing is, I think the main issue is that when people ask about that, and people that are concerned about that are not easily people that are maintaining other projects or that are involved with maintaining other projects. If you see, and in some cases it may be a bit confusing that you see in GitHub an organization handling a project and it seems like, oh, this is an organization, it's a community project, or it's a company project, or like this has great support because there's a lot of stuff going behind it, but you actually don't know who is maintaining the actual project. And projects, open source projects, are always handled and maintained by people, even if it's a huge organization, if it's one of these giant technology companies. There's a bunch of people and not too many that are the ones that are maintaining this project. And so the first thing is that like it's actually people that is maintaining the things. It's actually just like people that are doing the work. Now, the main concern about who is maintaining it and like who else, why no one else can merge, or like why no one else can come and do more stuff. The main concern is normally why or how to improve and how to solve particular issues, or how to review particular pull requests, or those things. There's nothing that will stop anyone from actually trying to check those issues and trying to solve them, or trying to see the pull requests and trying them and trying to see if they actually solve the problem. But it's not something that I can just like open the door and like allow anyone to come and just like hit merge and then have a bunch of things just merged because they were there. Normally no. I review each one of the pull requests, and in most of the cases they require some little bit of fine tuning on top. Maybe they didn't have like the documentation, maybe the code wasn't consistent with the rest of the code, maybe they broke some use cases that were already there, maybe like the tests were incomplete, things like that. So in most of the cases I need to add some additional commits on top of each one of the pull requests. It's just that that's not obvious and that's not visible in most of the cases. But then there's also the thing that anyone can actually come and review the pull request and see if it actually works. But in many cases, people come and say like, oh, the description looks great, I'm going to approve it, I want this merged now. And like recently I was checking one of these pull requests, it had four approvals saying like, oh yes, approve this right now. And then I tried out the code and it had a bug in one of the two use cases that it tried to solve. And there was like a bug right there that make Swagger, like will break Swagger UI right away. So if I just came and merged it, or if someone that saw the approvals or the people that were putting the approvals could just hit the merge button, that will have broken a bunch of applications. So
and just so everyone knows, there are certainly instances of, I'm not going to say FastAPI because I don't know, but I know of other projects, some of which I've been on, where not only were things merged, but things tagged and released as versions that were broken because core developers didn't look at things carefully enough. And one of the things is if Sebastian brings in someone to help out, he has to make sure that not only are they really checking stuff instead of just hitting the merge button, but also they share his vision for the project. And finding that is, well, one, running open source projects of size is hard, but finding people that share that and can join you and govern and maintaining things is super duper hard. And there's always mistakes on the way. I have certainly removed people from projects just because they did stuff that wasn't right. So
yeah, and like like the I think like one of the main things is that I feel like people get concerned about like, oh, no one else can merge or no one else can commit, and like as if that was like the main concern. But that's not really the bottleneck. The bottleneck is actually reviewing and making sure that things are working and that things are working correctly and helping others. So for example, in FastAPI, there's Marcelo Trelinsky. I never know how to pronounce the last name correctly. But it's the user Cludex. He helps a lot with FastAPI. He helps a lot of people in the issues. He helps review pull requests, and like he's actually helping a lot. He's the top FastAPI expert in the FastAPI people section, and is helping maintain FastAPI even if I'm not willing to like allow others to come and merge right away. For example, also Sophie from Explosion is helping with Typer a lot, and it's the thing is that the work to maintain one of these open source projects, the work is not merging, the work is not hitting commit, the work is actually reviewing the issues, reviewing the PRs, and if you want to see like a faster improvement or like a faster movement in the project, you could go and check those pull requests, test them out, and comment, hey, I tested this, I did this and that, and blah blah blah, and this works, and or maybe this could be changed or whatever. That will help a lot, because then I can see and I can check, okay, this is working for someone, this makes sense, and this is not broken, at least in that particular use case. So then I can give another check to the thing, but like at least like it had more eyes on it. So that will actually help a lot with all the maintenance of FastAPI or any of these projects. It's not just FastAPI, it's like any other open source project. Like maintaining an open source project is not just having the rights to hit merge and to commit. And in fact, like for those that are scared that if a boss hit me and like, oh, who gets it, there's a bunch of people that like some particular people that have access to the repositories and that merge, and that I have explicitly asked to not merge PRs directly, to let me have another view. But like that's already like established there too.
So in other words, you've accounted for the bus factor that should you.
Like if I die tomorrow, it's not that suddenly the repository is locked.
So, okay, that's good to know. So everyone, just to let you know, the bus factor has been solved. Okay, yeah, just I know where you're coming from and your reluctance to give up certain things. I know that people have said, oh, FastAPI should have its own GitHub project. I don't necessarily think that's I don't think it really needs that at this time, if ever.
Yeah, like, for example, the Flask, the Palettes project, the organization is called Palettes, but like most of the work or all the work is done by one person, David Lord. He's the maintainer of Flask, he's the maintainer of Click, Werkzeug. Like there's a lot of work that he's doing, and like it's an organization, but it's actually maybe him or just him. Like I really wish he could have more recognition, but that's the other thing, that when the thing is under an organization and it's not obvious who's helping, like not even at least the name is a reward of all that work. So yeah, like in many cases, many of these projects are maintained or handled by a particular person.
Yeah, I'm actually writing that in the chat, that David Lord is the maintainer of Flask, and I'm putting it on the stream. So we're giving him recognition for everything that he does.
Yeah, because it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work, and Flask drives a lot of the modern world. So thank you, David, for everything that you do. Here's a recognition from Daniel Roy Greenfeld and Sebastián Ramírez. Again, thank you.
Nice. Very good idea. Totally.
Yeah. And again, for those of you who are not coming, that's one that I think a great feature that your projects have is the attribution to others in the work that they do. That's important in our community. Okay, so we have time for one last question, or actually, why don't we, if there's something you want to say, Sebastián, maybe that's a good way to end this.
What can I say? No, I think, for example, if you want to help with FastAPI, there are very specific ways that you can help. It's all in the documentation. But not just in FastAPI. In all the open source projects that you are working on, you can go and you can actually help. You can contribute. In many cases, you can help others with their questions. That's one of the things that consumes time the most, is just helping others with their questions. Because in many cases, just framing the question correctly so that the person that is helping can understand what is the actual intention, the original intention of the thing. That getting to that point, in many cases, takes a lot of time and work. But if you can go and help others, that helps a lot in the projects, in FastAPI, or in any other open source project. And there's always ways to help the open source projects that you are interested in. For example, if you read in the documentation and you see a typo, and you will probably always see a typo, because when we write documentation, we don't necessarily come and read it again and again and again. And when you're reading that documentation from the first time, it's just fresh. You are fresh of that information. You will notice the errors and the typos and the things that are not explained well. And like, that's the perfect moment to go and contribute improvements to that documentation. I think helping with documentation is one of the best ways to start getting involved. And I think getting involved is very important. It's very important for open source, and it's something that any of you as an individual developer can help a lot and can actually have a huge impact.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that's a really good statement, and one I really believe in. And that's how we all get our start in open sources, contributing to other people's projects, and then we do our own. And typically, that's why when you see people who launch their open source project without ever contributing to other projects, you tend not to get a following for that project, just because you don't really know what problems really need to be solved, or how to, like, I guess, advertise. You're good. Yeah. So yeah, you're
But
good
like you just mentioned the thing that is like one of my main principles. One of the things that I preach the most, which is solving a problem. People talk a lot about innovation and disruption, and I always think that those are side effects of solving a problem. Focusing on innovation and disruption is not a good strategy. I don't think so.
No,
I think it's important
that means you're just trying to break stuff.
Yeah. And like, I think it's much more important to focus on solving a problem, and hopefully a problem that is important to you, because that will make sure that that you are solving it in a way that is actually useful, or at least that you are very close to the owner of the problem, so that you can actually solve it in a way that's useful for those people. And the first step of that is actually finding if there are already solutions that you can use before reinventing the wheel, as I call it.
Yeah. Well, like, you didn't reinvent what Pydantic did or what Starlet did. You built on those tools, and or SQL Alchemy. You didn't try to come up with your own ORM. I would never do that. Actually, I have. Like, many years ago, I was like, oh, I'm going to make my own. That was before my Python days. And I didn't really know what an ORM was. But okay. I think we're out of time. I do want to say thank you so much. And since I know we had some of your time probably away from your job, I think Forethought AI, they're hiring, right? So there should be a link in the description to this. And then, because my recruiter at Octopus will get mad at me if I don't say it, Octopus is hiring as well. Sebastian's company, Forethought, they do like data science, machine learning stuff. It's really awesome. And so if you're looking for work, I think you take remote workers from pretty much anywhere, right?
Yeah, like mainly in the US time zone. I'm the main anomaly. But yeah, like
so you work funny hours, is the result.
Yeah, I work at 20 hours.
Yeah, so if you work US time zone hours, that could mean North, Central, and South America, they have jobs. And of course, Octopus Energy, my employer, has jobs, and there'll be links in the description below. And so again, thank you so much, Sebastian. We really appreciate that you joined us today. And yeah, see everyone later.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you everyone for attending. It was very cool.
Okay. All right. Take care.
Bye.